Hello, everyone, and welcome to Brief, the fortnightly writing show on Cam FM. And this is our final episode. I can't believe I'm saying that. Cameron, how are you feeling? How are you doing?
It's a mixed bag of feelings, to be honest, today, Anna. I'm feeling very emotional, very emotional. No, but
Might shed a
seriously,
tear.
well, not serious. Why am I saying seriously? I am emotional. This is an emotional moment, actually. This has been a part of our lives for a couple of months now, but all good things have to come to an end. But I must say, time has gone extremely quickly.
Honestly, since we did the first episode, it feels like literally a blink of time has gone by since then.
Yeah, exactly.
How are you doing? Are you about to move back to uni?
Oh, I'm getting ready. The pressure of getting all kitchen stuff packed up. I've actually got the kitchen stuff packed now. Moving on to the wardrobe, bits and bobs. At the
Try and jam it all
weekend,
in the car.
have the suitcases packed for sort of Monday, Tuesday, hopefully, and then going back next Saturday night. So I don't actually get into Cambridge until 5 o'clock in the evening. So I think by the time I've set up my room,
Yeah,
I'm going to be very exhausted. I think it'll be time to get a bite to eat and then off to bed. So,
yeah,
so that's going
conk
to be
out.
interesting going back to Cambridge, yeah. But how are you getting on with your prep?
Yeah, I think touch wood, I've got everything. Last time I forgot my toothbrush, which is a pretty key thing, but I
Oh,
think I've
no.
got them all down. I had to buy another one while I was in Cambridge. One of the first things I had to do was go out and buy a toothbrush. So I think I've got everything. It seems like well, it is a bit like my entire life downstairs in a huge mountain pile in my living room,
Yeah.
but I'm hoping it'll all fit in my dad's car. Fingers crossed.
No, but I'm very much looking forward to it. It's going to be very exciting to see old friends. And
Yeah, get going again with the term after a 5 month break.
so long. So
But
long.
it's allowed briefed, so there's a
Exactly.
silver lining and everything. And speaking of brief, your brief for this show was to write a piece with idolatry as our impetus, or not ours, your impetus. And we've had an interesting selection of entries. We had 4 entries this week. Well, one might say the most mysterious episode we've ever had because we have not one but 2 anonymous entries and another entry that is just because of broadcasting laws, things like that, because this is going on the radio. It is, we can't say it on the radio, but we will be putting that in the YouTube episode. So that's an extra
Yes.
incentive to watch out for that and watch our YouTube episode for that.
Our X-rated version of Briefed. Briefed After Dark, as I called it.
Briefed up to dark, yeah, completely. Don't be, it's not too extreme or anything, it's just obviously with radio and things it's can't quite fly,
Yeah.
but yes, so very much looking forward to reading out the entries for this week. As usual, they've been very wide ranging, positive, negative, all sorts, which is what I'd really hoped. And also I think lots of the entries took the original religious focus and then sort of either wrenched it from its context or wove it into different context, which you'll see as we read them out. So yeah, thank you everyone for sending in briefs for our final show. Our first submission is also our first anonymous submission of this week, and it is called simply Idolatry. Idolatry. Mother Mary, my insta-baddie queen, I am obsessed with you. My idol teen, a superstar so seen, I observe everything you do. You posted 13 times on Sunday, unlike the Lord, you never rest. 5 shots of your face, adorned with gloss, enhanced by fillers, a sublimely unnatural look. 4 videos of you dancing to the same song, utterly unique. The rest were ads and reposts, reminding me to drink water, telling me to buy deodorant, reminding me that Black Lives Matter, telling me to vote. What would I ever think without you? Hail Mary, full of immaculate taste, the Lord is an absentee. Blessed art thou amongst influencers, and blessed is the fruit of thy Instagram feed. What to say to an on-screen God who live streams every Tuesday at 8 p.m? Why yes, almighty mistress, yes, I'll buy your slimming teas till I'm buckled at my knees, expelling the contents of my stomach, purging myself in your image. Idol worship. Faith in the alienators who help us detach from reality. I bow at the altar of your filters. Praise be the influencers that erase the banality of mundane life. Holy Mary, mother of trolls, pray for our TikTokers now and at the hour of its death. Amen. Now, I really, really liked this poem. I love the way that writer has responded to the brief, and I relate to it quite a lot, as funnily enough over the summer I've been reading and watching up quite a bit about influencers. I don't use Instagram, but they've just been recommended to me, these videos, and the artifice that really is in everything they do. Obviously we know they use filters, but it's the precision, almost the model like, the airbrushing, the face tune, the angles, sort of, it brings together the idea that you will never look like these influencers because the influencers themselves do not look like these influencers, and how that can have potentially life-threatening consequences for the consumers of these pictures. And when they compare themselves to these impossible body types, well, they say, I will never look like that, it's impossible, or I must have dangerous surgery in order to achieve this. So I think this is a very important topic for a poem, and very current when speaking of idolatry. And the first two lines I think are just brilliant. Mother Mary, my Insta baddie queen. And as it uses the slang following such a traditional figure of chastity as Mary, and such a figure of purity who's hailed as the mother. And religion in terms of community I think is interesting in this poem, as the traditional church group wanes across the world. The fans of influencers, books, TV shows, pop culture rise and band together themselves. Whole communities are brought together from across the world, no longer bound by geography, and that can be a very good thing, but it can also leave room for exploitative behaviour and can morph into negativity. And how adoration can so easily morph into obsession in the line, I observe everything you do. And what I also thought was interesting is the knowing, revelling in the unnaturalness of the influencer. The added danger obviously is for those that don't know it's fake, but an added dimension is praising that fake, though not wanting to be it, it seems, but still purging themselves in the image of the influencer, and hailing the fakeness and the fillers and understanding that, but loving them anyway for it, and it being part of the adoration. And it's interesting that the ads and reposts, originally out of context, do seem like good things, telling you to drink water, buying deodorant, things like this, but then it devolves into appetite suppressants, the slimming teas, which influencers, including incredibly popular influencers and people with a lot of influence, like Kim Kardashian, using slimming lollipops, slimming teas, that sort of thing, and the effect that can have on their very young female audience. And almost cultish the appreciation they've created. The short line lengths overall too make the poem completely digestible and allows you to read it very fast, with bite-sized pieces of information like reminding me to drink water, telling me to buy deodorant, which mirrors the short, sharp ad or caption on Instagram, the bite-sized chunks of information or pictures that you digest. So thank you very much to this writer for sending in their submission. I really, really liked it, and I thought it's a very important topic and a really interesting use of the brief. Our next submission is our second and final anonymous submission, and it is called I See the Divine. I see the divine in the way your muscles move when you flex your hands, to try and will away the day and the way it has weighed on you and your hands. It's a strange thing to see God in the way a girl stretches tendons, but the fact that you exist in a way and time that I can perceive is a kind of miracle to me. I believe in God and his holy lands, and I believe in you, and that you are a holy land for me. I'd wage wars for you. Imagine myself a lion heart. But for now it is enough to watch your hands lightly and ask, baby, how was your day? Now, I think in lots of the submissions we have, and something that I love in those submissions, is the subjectivity, the sort of flitting between or morphing between the positive and negative. And I think in this poem, again, concerning the tone of love, the subjectivity is shown, especially in connotations of a holy land. Now, holy lands are sought after, precious, revered, sacred, but they are also incredibly volatile and subject to appropriation in terms of where European conquerors wrenched the lands from their original inhabitants. And additionally, I was thinking when I read this poem, what does it mean to be a Lionheart? Obviously we think of figures like Richard the Lionheart, and it's interesting when comparing the voices of masculinity versus femininity. Now, I'm all for shifting up traditional gender roles and thinking about the effects of wrenching something from its gendered context, and this poem does this really well. Now, the land of war, and more generally in the Middle Ages, medieval period, positions of power, violence and lionheartery, if that if I could use that as a word, were entirely male and proud to be so. So when the Holy Lands and the one fighting for it are both female in this poem, the connotations are really interesting. A medieval woman could never have been a Lionheart, but now she can, and she is. And I was thinking, in comparison to the previous anonymous poem, Idolatry, is this obsession or fascination? And I think it more edges on fascination in the way that the persona looks at the hands and is captivated by them and in love with them and the person the hands belong to. And I think also what's interesting is the hidden and the secret versus the outward, asking, baby, how was your day? Which is quite a simple, traditional, not formal, but certainly not an intimate sentence, compared to the grand thoughts of protection and self-sacrifice that she ruminates on. And using the typically religious language or religious connotations to speak about a love, specifically a love that in lots of the Bible is forbidden, is really interesting. That these strong feelings that one might feel for religion and can drive someone to fight for a religious war can be felt in other capacities and can be positive or negative or sort of be sitting on the fence, easily pushed one way or the other. So thank you so much to this writer for sending it in, and another really interesting interpretation of the brief. Our next entry is our aforementioned mysterious only for YouTube entry, and it's quite fittingly called Mystery Lover by Gaia Mondadori. Mystery Lover. I don't know what I'm emotionally feeling. I'm not skilled with words, but then I see you and my mind becomes a throbbing, mindless blur. Sitting there, or rather standing as I kindly placed you beside my blooming buds and an old Build-A-Bear shoe. I needn't light a ritualistic candle, for you are the altar, and this time I sincerely swear, an oath from hair to hair, that I shall not falter. You don't ask pointed questions. You don't probe. You respect my image, and never demand me to disrobe. Your skin is smooth and sleek to the bone, and you never ask for so-called sexy pictures on my phone. I don't have to stress if you've liked my recent post, and never have to fear an unwarranted ghost. But I can't tell my parents about you with pride, as my mother would joke snidely about me being wide. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, it's just others might think our relationship is crude. You're quite right. Yes, this is 2020 and female sexuality ought to be aplenty. You look good tonight. And to be honest, you make me feel part of a bigger fight. Right now, I just need to switch off and be alone with you. Because me plus us equals an invincible too. We'll wait a bit longer until it's dark. Even though we're not in a public park, I just prefer the privacy. Okay? Oh, God. Don't make me use the word bae. Our relationship is more sophisticated than that. It's deeper and more internal than some silly spat. It vibrates at a frequency only I can hear. But Christ. If you were ever to disappear, if the cleaner moved you anywhere but here, I don't want to think about it. Let's just go and have fun. No need to hide our truths, no need to run, no need to skip a meal, no need to be trapped in that awful hamster wheel of awful snogs of perfect bogs, no need to smile and fake it, because I've already made it. You don't seek monogamy, you don't order my mind. In fact, you kindly encourage my thoughts wander and grind against old memories or flirts, and play with hims or hers. No judgment, no fears, no secrets, no tears. You let me steer the gears, and never force something rear. You stop when I say stop, and make my eyes roll like they're licking lollipops. Yes, you make me feel like a child in a sweet shop full of naughty sours and strawberry laces that, by the way, I prefer to eat than be tied up with. But you respect that. You respect my choices. You respect my many powerful voices. Right. Okay, enough chit-chat, let's go. However, I want it. So, let's start slow. Hold down and breathe in. Hold down and wait for the fun to begin, the buzz. But no fuzz, no groping dirty fingers, no tragic smell that lingers, no crying over spilt blood, and no accumulated shameful crud, just simply perfect focus. So no hiding, only seeking. Feel the buzz like music playing, only you and I with our bodies swaying against the patriarchal algorithm to a rampant, rabid, raunchy rhythm. I'm getting good at this. At us. I can now time it perfectly so as not to miss my bus. It's like you're a part of me. If only you could grow limbs and make me a tea, then you'd be the ideal partner. But hey, I'm not a sleazy grafter. I'm over the moon with you now. I'm reclaiming it all, even the rhyming cow, because you understand that this is a one-woman band. And I just need you in my hand to help me spring into another land, wherein I can hardly stand, because you make me weak at the knees. You make me say things to myself like, please. You even make me think that I like myself. Which is something I thought could only be a quote on a shelf. Anyway, I have a hinge date now, but don't worry, it won't be wow. I'll promise I'll see you later. My forever trusty £20 vibrator. Now, I like this poem, and I think, although it's a comic poem and it is funny, it breaches an important subject. They're breaking down the taboo of female masturbation, and as she says, this is 2020 and female sexuality ought to be aplenty. And again, this poem uses sort of religious language, talking about altars for a non-religious subject, which is perfectly sort of what I wanted from these submissions, to take the initial context and sort of explore that and push it out and see all the different things you could talk about when thinking about idolatry. Obviously, there's the personification of the vibrator, which forms the crux of the poem. Yet she seems to praise his inanimateness. It doesn't need anything in return. It doesn't need pictures. It doesn't need all these things back from her that she doesn't necessarily want to give. I also like the continued wordplay and the puns on switch off when she switches off, but of course she's technically switching it on. And when it says, vibrates at a frequency only I can hear. And I like in general just the light-hearted tone, and the rhythm and the effect this creates is slightly similar to Idolatry, one of our previous submissions in this week. But the short, sharp bursts, instead of being a small staccato rhythm like the Instagram captions, things like that I was mentioning, this has the comic tone in mind. It's light-hearted, it's sort of jolly, that sort of thing. Especially the no need to be trapped in that hamster wheel of awful snogs or perfect box, and you need to smile and fake it because I've already made it. I love that the lines get even shorter, so it's even more precise and staccato, but in a positive way as opposed to a negative way. And I also like the mention of not to miss my bus, slotting it into the mundane with again a comic tone, but also showing that it's an everyday thing and breaking that taboo again. So thank you very much, Gaia, for sending it in.
If you squinted your eyes and looked hard into the distance, you could almost see him approaching. He walked slowly, deliberately, through the wild gorse and heather, his trousers drenched and muddy from the knee down. He was wearing an expensive-looking suit, finely tailored, but it was no use to him anymore. It was soddened, warped, and torn in places. He exhaled hard, concentrating all his energy on each and every step, one in front of the other. He was in the middle of a heath, seemingly nowhere. He had finally cracked. For years, he'd lived amongst everything. The commute, the tiny apartment, the phones and laptops, the bills, the buses, shops and streaming people. All of it pressing violently upon his head like a vice, squeezing hard until it shook with the pressure. Then, one day, everything had split open in a burning stream, and now he was wandering through an open moor, mind as blank as the slate-grey clouds above him. He'd walked several miles before he'd started seeing and thinking properly again, before he noticed the air had cooled, and the rain had come, and that the clouds stretched out above his head like rippled muscle. But this was something he had to do. You could see him wandering this way and that, in the open expanse, confused and pathetic, his arms outstretched. With his arms outstretched in that way, he looked like an abandoned scarecrow in the middle of the landscape, neglected even by the crows and the slicing rain. But he hadn't the nobility of a tragic pose. Rather, he stumbled across the heath like some stage buffoon, a source of laughter and scorn. The sky poured down tears aplenty, as if to mock him. Now he was stumbling forward, half capable of falling face first into the drowned gorse and heather. His hands were wet, cold and stinging, and his face stung even more beneath the wind's violent lashes, so his eyes were scrunched up like damp, torn paper. His feet, similarly, had lost all sense long ago. He felt as if he were heaving dead lumps of flesh attached to his legs. But off in the distance he finally saw it. It was what seemed to be a rising hillock in the distance. He carried on walking. It seemed the more he moved, the more time stood still and watched him. Each footfall halved itself into nothingness, so that he might as well not move his legs at all. The hillock in the distance seemed to remain the same distance away, like some awful mirage suspended in the air. Through the rain, it was difficult to make out its shape entirely. It might well be a mirage, he thought. His mind remembered the gym and the treadmill, the dreadful sense of moving nowhere beneath the illusion of progress. His mind remembered that treadmill, the bus to work, and all his time in the office as the same experience. Time was like the rack. The more it stretched out, the more it hurt, the harder it was to retreat, and yet you went nowhere. Of course, if you were to watch him, you would be able to see that the hillock was in fact real, and that he was making slow, steady progress towards it. In fact, you could see that he was far closer than he thought. You could see that he never stopped once, even when he stumbled with all the grace of a drunkard. You could see that he never once took his eyes off his target. You could see that he walked in a trance like a zombie brought back from the dead, with one more task to complete before it could return to Earth. You wouldn't be able to see his eyes from your vantage point, but you'd be able to tell from the way he moved that they were glazed and dumb like an animal before it's put down. And then, at last, he was there. It had come upon him suddenly, as if the hillock had leapt towards him. He realised that there was a small opening before him, forming a sort of mini-valley between the rising earth. There was a little stream running through it, which had flooded in the torrent so that it rushed upwards towards him. This surprised him slightly, since the water was running uphill. But he paid it no mind. He jumped from one side to the other to keep his legs out of it. There was no reason to do this. He was already soaked up to his knees. On he went, climbing downwards through the valley, the sky darkening around him. If you had stood there, you would have seen him disappearing into the gap, as if entering his tomb or the entrance to hell. He disappeared swiftly and cleanly, like the knife into the breast of the sacrifice. If you'd watched him, you would have soon seen nothing but the sky going from slate to ink, and you would have heard the thunder rumbling like some hungry god. You would have felt the pressure of the air drop, felt a breeze whip through your bones, and would have felt and heard the first lashings of thunder. But no one was there to watch. He was all alone, descending the valley as it darkened. The stream rushed with even greater intensity now, so that it was impossible to avoid. It gurgled past his knees so that he struggled to wade against it. But as the water's force intensified, so the passage narrowed. He placed his hands on either side of him to steady himself. But as he felt the sides of his narrowing confine, he felt no grass. His hand slid over cold, slimy rock cooled in the very depths. There were few glimmers of light now. When he looked back, light seemed little more than a pinprick, a disturbance in his eye of little more importance than a grain of sand or speck of dust. His need of it diminished as he descended. He couldn't remember the point at which the sky had been replaced by rock, but it had been that way for some time. The last few pinpricks of light were still there, right at the other end of the tunnel when he looked back. Vague remembrances of his birth flickered through his brain, going from the damp comfort of the darkness towards the surging electrical light. He dimly remembered the crisp, clean uniforms of the nurses and the doctors, bending over him with their forceps like benevolent gods. He'd always remembered that they'd needed forceps. He wouldn't come out. He had been stuck. He continued wading through the water, which was now above his knees. It had been from the strip lights of the hospital to the strip lights of school, and from the strip lights of school to the strip lights of the office. Along the way, he'd made friends and lost them. He'd laughed, he'd regretted things, he'd loved some people and hated more. He'd lived 1,000 lives and 1,000 deaths. But each and every one of those breaths had meant nothing by itself. No single memory he could recall made anything worth it. They were shattered fragments, only worth something when amassed together in his head. None of it mattered now. That world was no longer his. He had been rejected from it. When everything that was his had gone, he had wandered through the streets. Not for long, but for long enough. He'd shouted, he'd bawled and cried. He'd railed against everything that had brought him low. But no matter how he shrieked, the people walked past him as they would any lamppost or missing child poster. The more he tried to make waves in the sea of motion around him, the more he thrashed and kicked, the more still the waters. It was then that he knew it was pointless. to preach within the swelling crowd is to hold water in a sieve. So he departed. But he knew that there was no place for him to go. Every space had been conquered by concrete, by drab manacles and by grinding gears. Even where the spaces were green and lush and open to the wind, minds were crammed full of concrete. He wandered through town after town, village after village, meeting nothing but scorn and fear. Soon he lived in isolation and loneliness amongst the wilds, still clothed in the garb of his former life. But he knew nothing of the witches and the hags that might sustain him. He called out, whistled in the gentle winds, but nothing came. He had nothing, and for many nights he floundered on the verge of death, walking still in his trance. But one night, when sleeping in the forest, he dreamed of the valley. He dreamed of his end, and of his beginning, and of the necessary sacrifice. He dreamed of the scythe lifted high, of the womb-like cavern where he was headed, of the moon waning in the depths of winter and the shadow of a twisted elder tree. Upon waking, he saw the moon tangled in the branches above him and knew what to do. He would walk to the spot which had been placed in his dreams. This was where he was now, up to his waist in running water, descending until he was up to his neck in it. It bubbled and rushed past with rank ferocity, yet he managed to push through it until he was entirely submerged. Before long, the passage broadened out again, and the water level dropped back down to his waist. Then, up ahead, he saw something. It was a hole in the ceiling, a clean, perfect circle hewn through the rock like the finger hole of a flute. Ever since the water level had dropped, the ceiling had narrowed until he was half crouching, so he could stand up and put his head through it. As he did so, he looked around. It was the entrance to a chamber of some sort, but he couldn't discern the shape of any kind. There was nothing but a bare rock floor extending outwards, with shadows skirting the edges. It was somehow murkier than the passage beneath it. He pressed on to his elbows and hauled himself into the chamber. Then, as he stood up, something happened. The room was lit up in a blaze of pale, bone-white light from directly above him. The chamber was a perfectly shaped dome, much like the cupola of a mosque. All of it had been hewn from rock by human hand, and strange patterns he couldn't decipher covered the walls. The light source seemed to be coming from the very top of the dome and was diffused across the entire space. But it was what it illuminated around the edges of the chamber that mattered. A ring of women, ranging across the entire spectrum of life, all of them dancing in a counterclockwise motion around him. They were in the middle of this dance when the light entered, and initially was silent. But now they started to shout and sing, making a terrible cacophony as they circled round him. They were all intoxicated, and some of them were chewing on strange leaves in an ecstatic frenzy. He soon noticed that the ring was closing in on him, and that some of the women were wielding small scythes. The hole through which he had entered was now closed, and he knew that everything was fine now. This was what he had been heading towards for days, perhaps even weeks. He closed his eyes, stood still, and let them advance. The chants and screams grew louder around him, and soon he could sense their motion. Then he sensed their hands upon him. He felt his flesh being slashed, torn and ripped in frenzied abandon, and in his final few moments of consciousness he looked upwards, eyes closed, and smiled. Far away from this cavern, in homes and offices round the country, no one else heard the chanting, the chewing, or the tearing of flesh. They heard the television, the kettle boiling, and music playing on their phone. They sat and got in their few hours of relaxation before going to bed. It's going to be a busy day at work tomorrow, they all thought. Soon, electric lights flickered off across the country, leaving only the filaments of the street lamps emitting their damp, orange glow. But far above these intermittent glimmers hung the moon, bone white and eternal in its ever-changing aspect.
Okay, you've just heard Cameron reading out Greg's poem, A Necessary Sacrifice, and I have him with me now. Greg, how are you doing?
Very well, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on the show, and at such short notice. As usual, we always do this to people, but thank goodness everyone has a spare half an hour or so to do the interview. Okay, so straight into the questions. So how did the brief inspire you? How did you use the brief when sort of thought sharing and writing, and did you find it useful?
I did find it useful because I've been kind of thinking about something along the lines of idolatry for a couple of weeks or so, because recently I read Robert Graves' The White Goddess, which is all about kind of, I suppose, idolatry and ancient peoples, the way in which they worshipped different gods of the environment, and they didn't just have one absolute god like would later develop with, say, Christianity or Islam or these other religions, but rather they had different gods attached to different parts of the natural world. So I found that interesting to start thinking about the way in which we kind of relate to the natural world and how it's changed so very much since that time, and how naturally the way in which we sort of approach the natural world has changed.
Definitely.
But the interesting thing is, even though we don't worship these things like we used to, even though we don't celebrate different trees, we don't think of anything for... If I would say ash tree, you probably wouldn't think of a particular god or anything. But within the culture now in which we exist, we have our own idolatries, our own things we fixate on and worship. You might have a person, say, who is particularly obsessed with a Hollywood star, or a person who is particularly obsessed with a certain make of car. And certainly it's not a religious kind of idolatry, but it is a fixation or worship of an item or an image or a thing, which probably still exists now. So that was what I was kind of thinking about when I was writing it.
That's interesting. It reminds me a little bit of when you're saying about our sort of relationship to the natural world. The first poem you wrote for us, the House in the Country one, and how that, like, we have the sort of, now we have idealization of the country as tranquil, peaceful, away from the rat race, that sort of thing. But then what it actually is when you're there, and how you're being, the state of mind that you're in will change how the environment sort of feels when you're there, and it can not live up to those expectations. Yeah. Exactly. And so obviously your piece is called A Necessary Sacrifice. Why would you say this sacrifice is necessary, or is it up to the reader to decide whether it is or not?
I could just say it's up to the reader, but that'll be easy. So I'm not going to say that. One of the reasons I called it A Necessary Sacrifice is because this central character of the thing, whatever it is kind of shunned by everyone, that he sort of becomes a bit of a pariah, and that's partly why he ends up going off on this strange journey which he does. And I was thinking about how it seems every society, you go all the way back to, say, the Spartans, they had their helots, whatever the hell you pronounce that name, who they would scorn and ridicule as outsiders. And I think every society has something that they scorn and ridicule in order to reinforce their own sense of being a society, reinforce their own ideals. Exactly. So these kind of wandering figures that end up either being killed or suppressed or mistreated, whatever, whether you call that a sacrifice or not, are in a way necessary. And is that something that... I was thinking, is that something that we will ever really break out of, having that outsider figure to scorn? Of course, the person is driven to what he does partly because of that isolation. So that was part of it. And any person who wishes to go... this is what I was saying about, not only is going to the countryside and hoping that'll help you ridiculous, because you still have all the preconceptions and ideas of a city, you're just taking to a countryside. But also, in order to do that, in order to live in the way that kind of way that people would have lived before, say, the Romans arrived, you would have to completely reject everything and everyone, which is itself a kind of self-destructive gesture. So you kind of have to become that necessary sacrifice, the thing that people can scorn and laugh at and evade. So that was part of why I made it the title. Though I could just say, "Hey, it's up to you."
Decide.
But that was partly what was going through my mind when I gave it that title.
It's interesting you say that about the sort of the scorned figure or the scapegoat, that sort of idea that has existed for millennia, hasn't it? And it sort of leads on quite nicely to my next question, I think. And was the first thing I thought of when looking at, like, I first read the description of the protagonist, I thought of a sort of Waiting for Godot style tramp figure. I know he has the suit at the start, but then it sort of regresses into sort of rags and things like that. And is this sort of character analysis sort of correct of him? Are we drawn to that sort of, is it that sort of scapegoaty type, someone who doesn't quite fit into society or try to fit in, but is sort of ejected from that and then can no longer come back into it?
No, I certainly think that's definitely most of it, really. I kind of like that archetype. I don't know why. I mean, hey, maybe it says something about myself. Ooh, I hope to dear God not. But I kind of like that idea of the wandering figure, be it poor Tom in Lear, or be it the wandering Jew, which is another classic example of this wandering figure, doomed never to stay in one place. It's quite, or I mean, even in popular culture, I think we're still fascinated with that idea. I mean, for example, the Time Lord, the Doctor, is like a perfect example of that. He forced forever to go on, existing, moving on, never stopping in a place, permanently sort of dissociated from the things that other people can rely on. It's kind of an interesting figure, and also there's something I find fascinating in the idea of a person who's scorned or seen as crazy or a fool, who is in actual fact wiser than all the people who laugh at them. I don't actually know. I actually know why I find that so interesting a figure. I don't know, but yeah, I go back to it a lot, I guess.
Now, my sort of final question is, I want to talk about the ending. I've spoken to you a little bit about this before. Am I wrong in this interpretation of the ending? To me, it seemed to be a sort of spiritual or physical pilgrimage back to the womb, following the amniotic stream, to be torn apart in something that's sort of likened to a religious temple, you say a mosque, by a group of women with scythes. Am I completely barking up the wrong tree, or?
I mean, yeah. No, but I mean, part of it is definitely that idea of travelling back to a kind of atavistic space. Because, for example, one thing I've been reading recently is Arthur Machen, who was a horror writer around the late 20th century, around like the decadent movement, and he wrote this famous story. He was very much fascinated with this idea of ancient cultures and ancient monuments and so on, and ancient ideas and perceptions of the world. And there's this one horror story which is primarily focused around this group of troglodyte tiny men living in the hills of Wales, deep beneath the earth, who are kind of these remnants from this evil primordial atavistic past, who, when you kind of go near their territory or go into these pastures into the hills, you never come back. And there's just these kind of representations of pure atavistic evil, unchanging. But then also, part of it was inspired really by what I've been reading about the White Goddess, because the White Goddess deals a lot with ancient societies. And one of the things it talks about, which is kind of its agenda, I guess, is that ancient societies, some of them were matriarchal. And so they worshipped goddesses, not gods. And women could take whichever lover they pleased, and the men were the second class. And there were these ritualistic dances in which women would chew on laurel leaves and kind of end up going into this trance and sacrificing the men. I don't know how accurate this is. I mean, I was talking with someone about it, and they're saying actually Apparently Robert Graves as a scholar is a little bit patchy, but just how lurid that was as an idea fascinated me. And this idea of going back to this strange primordial past where the relations are entirely different. And also it links back to the idea of nature and our relationship to nature, because the women are all holding sides, and I think they go from, well, I wrote the bloody thing, I think they go from young to fair to hag, which is the triple goddess of the year. So the waxing moon, the full moon, and the waning moon. And the triple goddess was kind of associated with the cycles of the moon and the natural world. And the waning of the year was extremely important. That was when the sacrifices took place, supposedly, according to bits of Robert Graves. That was where you would the king would be sacrificed and a new king would take their place. So that kind of idea of ancient sacrifice and this deep ancient connection to the world, natural world around them. And then also I think it ends with going back to just the click of the kettle and comfy domesticity. So we don't live in that world anymore. You know, we don't. It used to be so that when, you know, fall came, winter came, it was a threat of death and starvation.
Definitely.
And it was you really felt it. Whereas now, I suppose the only way we really know if winter's approaching is if it's a little bit colder and there are Halloween costumes in the shops. So it's a change. It's a change. I don't think the way in which we relate the cycles of the year and the nature, the natural world is massively changed. And you're right about the womb idea, because that was another thing in Graves. He talks about these tombs in which the entranceways to them were designed as if it were a womb, and the person would crawl down into this tomb, and it was a womb/tomb, I guess. Dylan Thomas would love that, but it's kind of about the closeness between those two things. And certainly that idea of it being a travelling back to the womb, and I guess also you could go into all kinds of things about, you know, Oedipal things going on there, perhaps unintentional. Again, I seek a psychoanalyst, but no, that's part of it. Going back to some deep primitive earlier age, which is kind of what the person is always doing. He's doing that from the beginning. And ultimately it's self-destructive. Again, he ends up being sacrificed. It's a self-destructive act, trying to seek this kind of early world is thoroughly impossible, and it can only end up leading to destruction. So that was kind of what was vaguely going through my mind when I was writing it. I probably ought to polish parts for that, but yeah, that was kind of it, I guess.
I definitely picked up on that sort of the not retrogression, but looking back to the ancient past, but the importance of it being, it's sort of murky, it's mythical, it's mystical. It wouldn't be those things if we understood it more, and if it was anyway similar to the way we live now. I think it's because it's so detached, and you can apply all sorts of sort of, obviously all the magical things happened then, and it was a completely different world, and that is the fascination of it. And then that the ancient world tied to like in my lifetime, the ancient was when I was born, you know what I mean? That doesn't quite make sense, but in my timeline, that was the start, whereas the ancient world was sort of seen a bit like the start. So yeah, I completely understand that sort of struggle with the ancient and fascination with the ancient. So yeah, hopefully that shed lots of light on Greg's piece, lots of really interesting ideas, and lots of books you've referenced that seem very, very interesting. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom. And thank you once again, Greg, for your interview. Now, like I mentioned in the Facebook post we did, I would just like to say a huge thank you to everyone who sent in an entry and to people that we interviewed at incredibly short notice. For George, for making our wonderful logo that I'm sure you've seen. Cam FM themselves for reading my long, convoluted pitch and still running the show. And just everyone that's listened in on the radio or on the YouTube. I'm incredibly aware that without you guys, there wouldn't be a show. And we'd just be knocking around waffling about nothing for half an hour without you. So I can't thank you enough. It's been honestly a privilege to read everything you guys have come up with, and it has surprised me every week with the length and breadth of everyone's creativity. And just a little recap of what we've achieved. We have had a prize-winning professional poet on our show for our second episode, which I think my life peaked at that moment. We've had a catastrophic video episode where my life troughed at that moment.
I wasn't involved in that one. That's why
Eva
it was
said it halfway
catastrophic.
through. Vote now if you want Cameron back. So, but best of all, the most important achievement we've got was we garnered 12 YouTube subscribers. Now, this has actually been a ploy to become a YouTube influencer.
Wow.
So I'd just like to say, keep following me. I'll keep posting daily updates. I'll be vlogging my next year. No, but thank you, in all fairness, thank you so much to everyone who's got involved, no matter how small.
And I'd just like to echo Anna's comments there. Thank you so much to everybody who's listened week in, week out. And obviously there wouldn't be a show without you. Some of the works have been brilliant. And you reminded me there, I never actually thanked Eva for filling in for me on that video episode as well. So thank you to Eva for that. And especially it's been great to get to know you as well, Anna. And it's the show's been sort of a constant part of the summer, as it were. It's been something to do, and it's been a great joy ever since I got the pitch. I thought I really want to get involved in this, and I don't regret it. So thank you to Anna, thank you to Eva again, and thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely getting to know you likewise. I'm sure people know, but because of coronavirus and everything, we've never actually met in real life. We've just had about 1,000 Zooms. So it's been a weird way of working.
Perhaps we will meet.
No, we definitely will.
One day.
Because you're so used to working with people in person and meeting them before you start a project and things like that. Even if you audition, you see them in person. So it's definitely been a very weird way of working. But I think it's come up with... I think we've, created a good thing.
Yeah, that's just been the case in general, hasn't it? I mean, like getting involved in a lot of the theatre and radio plays last term, that was the first moment where I really got involved in doing a bit of theatre in Cambridge. So all these people I've met and online, and it's going to definitely be quite interesting to see them in real life. So
see them not from the shoulder down, but they actually have legs.
Actually have a body.
And now, as you guys know, there is no new brief, sadly, for next episode. But all our episodes will be uploaded and put onto YouTube forever, for eternity. So if you would like to listen back to any of the shows that you yourself sent entries in, or you have friends in, they'll all be up on YouTube, kept up, including the video one. We're a little bit behind with uploading last week's, but that will definitely be up there. So you can listen to us on the go whenever you like.
Oh, well, I'll sign off first, take care, everybody. Take care, guys, and wish you all the best.
like to echo that sentiment. Take care, everyone. Hope you have, I was going to say, rest of a good summer, but perhaps not. But take care of yourselves, and thank you so much for listening to us. See you.
Bye.